First, I want you to know that in the Greek New Testament, a present tense, obviously and frequently, has the meaning of a future. Same thing here. Tax collectors and prostitutes are in the process of entering. They're beginning to enter and will enter the kingdom of God ahead of you Pharisees. And we do it in English. We say, I am going to London next week. You mean I will go to London. The parable here is about going to work for God in God's kingdom program. Working in the vineyard. Vineyard is a symbol of Israel and God's work, obviously. And the tax collectors, the lowest of the low, in the view of the self-righteous religious group, the lowest of the low are in the process of entering. They've decided to enter and will enter when it comes, the kingdom of God ahead of you. That's an awful indictment of the religious establishment. We might then want to apply that to our own time. Imagine if the system itself is flawed at some very basic level.
Do you have another example off the top of your head of what you call the Greek there that is sometimes present but with a future?
Yes, I do. I can think of this one right away. I'm going away to prepare a place for you. I'll come back, that's the future, and receive you to myself in the future, so that where I am, you may also be. That means where I will be, you will also be. So the tense takes its meaning, its time, from the context. So it's not infrequent. I mentioned the one at the beginning of Luke 17 there. This is a very tricky verse for some, because the very first verse in that chapter, they asked, when is the kingdom coming? Is the kingdom coming? The present tense in Greek. The meaning is clearly, when will the kingdom of God come? Some Pharisees asked Jesus, when God's kingdom is coming, the Greek word. And he answered, God's kingdom is not going to be something you can see. In other words, it's no good saying, look here, here it is, or look there, there it is. Don't look locally, because the kingdom of God will be all over at one time, I think is the correct translation there. Again, the future is implied. The kingdom is going to be not locally. Don't rush off, as the false prophets will say. Some people will say in the very next verse, some people will mislead you by saying, look, the kingdom of God is out here in the wilderness, or the kingdom of God is over there in some particular geographical region. That's going to be falsehood. No, when the kingdom comes, it will be just like the lightning flashing from east to west. So there it is. Behold, here it is, or there it is. That's a falsehood. For behold, the kingdom of God will be all over, not within you, certainly not in your heart. That's a very serious mistranslation in the King James Version. The kingdom of God is not something in your heart. I refer you to the famous verse in the Old Testament which speaks of the kingdom of the Lord in the hands of the sons of David. I note not in the hearts, but in the hands of David's descendant. You really must understand that the kingdom of God is primarily, firstly, in its most basic meaning, the messianic kingdom promised to David and his descendants. Jesus being, of course, the absolute key and signal representative of those children of David. So the kingdom of God is going to be in the hands of Jesus, David, and the descendants of David, who are spiritual descendants, the descendants of Abraham, that's the whole church, true believers. It's going to be in their hands, never in their hearts. The kingdom of God is not something in your heart, other than in the very limited sense in which you might say, well, the promise of the kingdom, the spirit of the kingdom is with us now. That's certainly true. But 98% of the kingdom verses, of which there are well over 100 in the New Testament, refer to that future kingdom which is going to begin, I repeat, begin at the second coming. That's why you're praying in the Lord's Prayer, may your kingdom begin, may it start, may it come. That implies that it's not already here, other than in the limited and different sense that the preaching of the kingdom is present. The promise of the spirit of the kingdom is certainly present, but the kingdom, properly speaking, belongs to that parousia, that time of the resurrection of the just, Luke 14:14. Not to have that scheme and that framework in your mind is to be in a big muddle from the start.